In our lives, there are figures who seem to be woven from the most caustic irritation, from pure, distilled revulsion, capable of burning you to the core. You meet such a person and something inside you tightens, screaming, "No, not this." This could be the eternal whiner whose complaints, like a toxic fog, envelop everything, depriving you of air and hope. A person who never takes responsibility for their own life, yet expects the entire world to revolve solely around their endless problems and imagined tragedies. Or it might be someone who flits through life with unbearable lightness, avoiding any obligations or deep feelings, like a butterfly unwilling to touch the ground lest it soil its fragile wings with reality. They don't just annoy you, they hook you, dragging you into a vortex of uncontrollable disdain, causing almost physical pain from their presence in your sphere, like a shard lodged under your skin, constantly reminding you of itself. An irony, like a thin yet strong thread, permeates the very fabric of our relationships. It is precisely these seemingly unbearable traits, these wrong partners whom we consistently choose, only to reject with equal fervor, that carry more than just a random set of flaws. They are like ancient, forgotten maps, with invisible ink marking the locations where our own treasures are buried, or conversely, the abysses into which we've cast our most inconvenient, improper qualities. Or perhaps more accurately, it's something deeper, more archetypal, not just a reflection, but an imprint, like the track of an ancient, mighty beast on damp, yielding earth, indicating something that was once an integral part of you, but was rejected, repressed, buried under layers of decorum, social expectations, and parental guidance. It is no accident, no whim of fate that precisely these qualities, these types, these archetypes evoke such a turbulent, almost instinctive response in us, this painful resonance. They are a living reminder, a pulsating wound that points to those parts of our soul we once decided to sever, hide, or declare unworthy, dangerous, or shameful. In every such flash of revulsion, in every bout of rejection, in every painful internal protest lies an invisible door, not just to understanding, but to your own undiscovered strength. This is not merely a conflict with the external world. It's a profound, almost mystical resonance with an inner echo, with that part of you that was once rejected and is now desperately trying to be seen. The irony is that precisely in this rejection, in this seeming weakness or flaw that we so vehemently condemn in others, lies untapped potential, repressed energy, which when acknowledged and integrated can transform your life, elevating it to an entirely new level of wholeness and authenticity. But why does this mechanism work so flawlessly, with such ruthless, almost surgical precision, targeting precisely those who carry these repressed sparks? Why do we, with fatal inevitability, repeatedly make the same mistakes, attracting what we seemingly despise with all our soul? To truly understand this paradox, to untangle this Gordian knot of self-sabotage and hidden desires, we must journey back to the very source of this shadow, to the site of the first transgression against our own integrity, where this ghostly yet profoundly influential force originated. This isn't merely about choosing a partner. It's about how our internal maps of the world were formed, what was erased from them, and the price we pay for that oblivion. We've discussed invisible imprints, ancient maps that lead us to those who evoke the deepest rejection, yet are inexorably attractive. Now it's time to rewind the tape of time to understand precisely where these maps were drawn, where the foundations of the shadow were laid, which then gets projected onto our romantic partners. This isn't just discomfort. It's the echo of a long past, almost primal experience when parts of our soul were declared outlawed. Allow yourself to delve into the depths of memory, not seeking specific dates, but sensations, invisible bifurcation points. At what moment in your life did you learn that qualities essential for full and harmonious intimacy, for success in romantic relationships, ambition, healthy assertiveness, the right to make mistakes, vulnerability, were bad, shameful, or dangerous? Perhaps it was the shadow of parental anxiety that brushed against your first childhood initiative when the drive for independence was interpreted as disobedience and a healthy, competitive spirit as selfishness. Recall how a genuine urge to win, whether in a game or a school competition, was labeled boasting, and defending your own boundaries was called rudeness. In that moment, a part of your healthy, vital assertiveness necessary for protecting yourself and your interests and relationships was driven underground, marked as socially unacceptable. Repressed, it didn't vanish, but waited for its moment to manifest through projection. Or perhaps it happened when your sincere vulnerability, openness, and desire to share your innermost self were met with coldness, ridicule, or even worse, betrayal. When childhood tears expressing genuine pain were met with phrases like, men don't cry, or girls must be strong, don't show weakness. You then learned that openness was not a bridge to intimacy, but an invitation to harm. You sealed off your capacity for true vulnerability, hiding it deep within, and now you either seek it in those who seem unapproachable, or conversely, unconsciously push away those who dare to be open because their vulnerability mirrors your own repressed one. And what about the right to make mistakes? So natural in any learning process, it might have been branded as loser after the very first misstep in the eyes of a significant adult or peer. Perhaps every academic or interpersonal failure was accompanied by demeaning comments, forming the conviction that perfection was the only acceptable standard. This perfectionism, imposed from the outside, drove into the shadow your ability to be imperfect, to try new things, to take risks, and most importantly, to forgive yourself for your human weaknesses. And now you either painfully search for an ideal partner who never makes mistakes and, of course, don't find them, or you attract those who constantly err and their blunders unconsciously irritate you because you yourself don't allow yourself such a luxury. It was in these invisible, often unconscious moments that the unseen boundaries of your soul were formed, creating internal prohibitions against expressing qualities deemed dangerous or shameful in the context of love and acceptance. These lessons, etched not in ink but in fear and pain, became the foundation for future projections. The shadow is not merely the absence of light, it's the imprint of what was rejected by our first teachers, society, and then by ourselves in our striving to be accepted, loved, and safe. We learned to hide those parts of ourselves that we believed might disturb a fragile peace, provoke condemnation, or deprive us of love. These repressed aspects of our personality do not vanish. They merely go underground, taking the form of the shadow, and then like a magnet, draw to us people who are the living embodiment of these very qualities. And here lies the paradox. We either fiercely hate in them what we forbade ourselves, or desperately seek what we ourselves lack, but are afraid to acknowledge and develop within ourselves. While unique, these personal histories of shadow formation are merely echoes of more ancient and universal laws governing the human psyche, where the expulsion of one's own qualities from the tribe becomes the price for survival. We've already discussed how deeply personal reactions to others serve as maps to our own repressed inner worlds, to those corners of the soul where the light of consciousness penetrates with difficulty. But this principle, this invisible law of attraction and repulsion, extends far beyond mere recognition. It is a universal mechanism, relentlessly governing not only our everyday interactions, but also the most intimate bonds we form. The shadow is not just a collection of rejected traits. It is a living, pulsating energy that demands recognition. Its return to wholeness. Imagine it as the energy of an unpaid bill. Every quality we've rejected, every impulse we've suppressed, every aspect of our soul labeled unworthy, dangerous, or shameful in childhood does not disappear. It merely goes underground, accumulating potential much like tension in a long forgotten but unsettled financial transaction. This energy inevitably seeks release, manifestation, and most often it finds expression through other people who become mirrors of our own repressed needs and desires. We either fiercely reject in them what we forbade ourselves, attempting to avoid encountering our own reflection, or we are desperately drawn to what we lack, but we're afraid to acknowledge within ourselves. Or consider it from another perspective, as an expulsion from the tribe. Within the depths of our psyche exists an internal tribe, a totality of all our qualities, abilities, and desires that rightfully belong under the sun of consciousness. When at an early age, under pressure from the external world, parents, society, we were forced to reject a part of ourselves, be it healthy assertiveness, vulnerability, ambition, or even the right to make mistakes. We essentially exiled it from this inner circle. It became an outcast, a renegade, denied the right to exist in the conscious field. But the exile doesn't vanish into oblivion. It wanders outside the camp, longing for return, and its call, its unspoken pain, resonates with those who embody these very qualities. We are drawn to them or repelled by them precisely because they carry an echo of our own lost self, unrealized potential, or suppressed strength. Recall the tragedy of Dr. Faust. Mephistopheles, who appeared to him, was not merely an external demon, but the deepest archetypal embodiment of Faust's own repressed, intellectually and morally rejected aspects. His thirst for boundless experience, his cynicism toward conventions, his rebellious spirit that denied all limitations. Faust, striving for higher knowledge and renouncing base desires, only drove them deeper until they materialized in an image that offered him worldly power and pleasures. This story is a powerful illustration of how what we repress does not disappear, but takes on a form, sometimes tempting, sometimes frightening, but always demanding integration, even if through painful confrontation. Thus, everyone we meet carries the potential for profound self-knowledge. This is especially evident in romantic relationships, where the boundaries between self and other become most permeable and projections gain maximum force. It is here, in the vortex of passion and disappointments, that we most often encounter reflections of those parts of ourselves that were rejected or remained unrealized. These reflections manifest in specific types of people who evoke not just interest or sympathy, but irrational, sometimes inexplicable reactions, from blind adoration to all-consuming hatred. The depths of the human psyche are mutable and full of paradoxes, but nowhere are their manifestations as obvious as in the mirror of our romantic attachments. We've discussed the shadow, those aspects of ourselves banished to the hidden corners of the soul, rejected, branded as unworthy. But how does the shadow take on flesh in the real world? Whom does it embody to reappear before us, demanding attention? It manifests in the guise of those who evoke irrational, burning hatred, contempt, or inexplicable irritation within us. Their traits, seemingly utterly alien, nonetheless draw our gaze, making us inwardly recoil with disgust or helplessness. In the gallery of these shadow archetypes that wander through the labyrinths of our hearts, several are particularly striking. The first is the eternal victim, a person whose life seems an endless string of misfortunes for which they are never to blame. They bathe in sympathy, but exude passive aggression, masterfully shifting responsibility onto others' fate or circumstances. They seem to bear an invisible cross, and this cross weighs not only on them, but on anyone who dares to approach. Next to them, we feel helpless, numb, sometimes even guilty for their suffering, even though we've done nothing wrong. Whenever they lament the world's unfairness, a wave of irritation rises within us. Why don't they just pull themselves together? Why don't they change something? And this why echoes not just towards the victim, but as a reflection of our own unrealized impulses for action. The second archetype, equally powerfully attractive and repulsive, is the reckless adventurer. This person lives on the edge, ignoring rules, obligations, and consequences. Their freedom seems boundless, their impulsivity captivating, yet simultaneously frightening. They can be charming, charismatic, but their decisions are often illogical, their promises ephemeral, and their actions destructive. They acknowledge no authorities, tolerate no limitations, and their path always leads through chaos. We look at them with condemnation, with secret envy, with a desire to set them on the right path, but only feel their uncontrollable energy throwing us off balance. They evoke anger in us due to their irresponsibility, contempt due to their seeming lack of moral compass, and an irrational desire to save or fix them. Consider the story of Olivia and Mark. Olivia, meticulous, responsible, always striving for order and control, met Mark. Mark was the embodiment of that very reckless adventurer. He might disappear for the weekend without warning, quit his job because he got bored, or invest all his savings in a dubious venture, believing in luck. Olivia, accustomed to planning every step and living by a schedule, was horrified by his unpredictability. She could lecture him for hours, trying to reason with him, to prove the absurdity of his actions. Her voice trembled with indignation when he would once again declare that life is short and you have to seize every moment. She hated him for his carelessness, for not valuing stability, for his seeming indifference to the future. Her irritation was so strong that she sometimes felt physical pain observing his antics. She despised him for his lack of maturity, for not conforming to her ideas of a proper partner. Yet, She couldn't leave him. There was something in his wild, untamed energy that drew her in, like a moth to a flame, despite all the suffering he caused her. He was the living embodiment of everything she so carefully suppressed within herself: spontaneity, letting go of control, and freedom from the shackles of expectations. His existence was a constant challenge to her own rigid boundaries. These figures, these demons of our relationships, are like phantoms woven from our own rejected qualities. They appear to show us what we refuse to see within ourselves, what we've condemned and locked deep inside. Their presence is not a curse, but rather an invitation to explore. For behind every irritating trait, every reason for contempt, lies something else, a distorted reflection of a strength we once rejected. If last time we peered into the flickering mirrors obligingly held up by our demons, those who disturb us to the depths of our soul, evoking a storm of rejection, or conversely, a strange, inexplicable pull, now it's time to shed light on their true nature. We instinctively turn away from what appears to be a vice, weakness, or threat, unaware that behind every distorted mask lies something else, not a flaw, but an exiled virtue, not a deficiency, but power turned to its shadow side. Let's consider the eternal victim, the one who seems to carry all the world's burdens, whose complaints echo in every conversation, and whose embrace of helplessness paralyzes any attempt at action. We see weakness, an unwillingness to take responsibility, infantilism, and our irritation is the cry of an inner strength yearning to break free but imprisoned. But what if this vice is merely the inverse of something far more valuable? What if behind the mask of helplessness lies a suppressed capacity for genuine vulnerability, the ability to admit you're not omnipotent, that you need help, support, compassion? It's the right to shed your armor and allow yourself to be weak without fear of judgment. By rejecting the victim, we reject the right to our own fragility, to ask, to receive, to lean on another's strength, viewing this as a sign of feebleness rather than a bridge to deep human connection. What valuable ability or right have you forbidden yourself by banishing this vice into the shadow? Perhaps it's the right to rest, to relinquish the burden of omnipotence, to trust the world and people, to experience true intimacy born from mutual need rather than ostentatious independence. It's the right to be human with all its limitations, yet with the full potential to receive support. Or take the reckless adventurer, the one whose unpredictability seems a threat to any order, whose irresponsibility borders on madness, and whose life is perpetual chaos. We condemn them, seeking to curb, systematize, and fit them into frameworks. But deep down, doesn't envy whisper as we watch their apparent freedom? Behind the facade of the adventurer's chaos lives something wild, primal, the capacity for spontaneity, for living in the here and now, for risk that opens new worlds. This vice is nothing other than a suppressed thirst for adventure, the right to make mistakes, to step beyond the familiar, to play, to the unbridled joy of being. By exiling the adventure into the shadow, we cut ourselves off from the right to unpredictability, to relinquish total control, to a creative impulse that fits no schedules. What valuable ability or right have you forbidden yourself by banishing this vice into the shadow. Perhaps it's the right to unbridled joy, to the courage to be different, to trust intuition that leads along untrodden paths, bypassing well-worn roads. It's the right to play, to genuine curiosity, to that vibrant energy capable of turning the world upside down if given free rein. Thus it becomes clear, our demons are not so much evil as distorted reflections of our own exiled virtues. They represent what we once deemed dangerous, unacceptable, weak, or too strong, and locked deep inside. This rejected and forgotten part of us does not disappear, but takes on grotesque forms, appearing to us in others. And when we encounter it in a partner, it's not a coincidence, but a call to return home, to heal the rift within ourselves. To embrace the shadow does not mean becoming like the demon, but reclaiming the fullness of your strengths, opening locked doors to your own resources. Is not about indulging weaknesses, but about expanding the spectrum of your personality, about understanding that the qualities we so vehemently condemn in others may well be the keys to our own freedom and wholeness. However, precisely how this internal conflict manifests in specific romantic relationship scenarios and what decisions we make in an attempt to avoid encountering our shadow, that's another story, awaiting its moment. It is here in the arena of heartfelt attachments that the unaccepted shadow plays out its most dramatic plots, carving patterns of recurring suffering onto the tablets of our lives. Recall how many of us, raised from childhood to be self-sufficient, to believe in the immutability of our own strength, and that asking for help is a sign of weakness, were inexorably drawn to those who seem the embodiment of eternal need. We chose partners whose lives resembled an endless series of crises, where every decision was postponed and responsibility was shifted onto others' shoulders. We became not just a support for them, but an entire world in which they could serenely reside in their helplessness. And the more we gave, the more we rescued, the deeper we became. Entangled in this dynamic, denying ourselves the right to fatigue, to vulnerability, to our own request for support. Why? Because in their eternal victimhood, we saw something we feared to discover within ourselves, the shadow of our own right to imperfection, to rest, to simply be human, not an inexhaustible source of strength. The fear of being the same, weak, helpless, compelled us to heroically bear their burden just to avoid admitting that we too sometimes need a helping hand. Or if your youth was marked by strict control, where any display of spontaneity or deviation from the prescribed path was perceived as chaos. Didn't you sometimes fall under the charm of those who seemingly lived without any rules, those whose lives were a whirlwind of non-commitment, whose promises dissolved into thin air, and whose tomorrow was a blank slate they were in no hurry to fill? We admired their freedom, their lightness, but simultaneously tried to tame them, organize them, and fit them into the framework of familiar order. We tried to manage their chaos to avoid confronting our own repressed desire for reckless joy, for the right to make mistakes, for a creative impulse that fits no regulations. It was a paradox. We were drawn to them because they embodied our suppressed spontaneity, but then tried to change them because we feared their freedom would infect us, making us not like what we were accustomed to seeing ourselves as: responsible, predictable, flawless. Or, if you were taught in childhood that good people are not selfish, not assertive, and do not seek power, that ambition is a vice and defending one's interests is a sign of bad taste, You might have found yourself alongside those who conversely displayed astonishing passivity, indecisiveness, and a complete lack of ambition. You felt this as a burden, constantly pushing them to act, taking the initiative yourself, experiencing deep irritation from their inaction, their inability to self-actualize. But in reality, this was your own repressed energy of assertiveness, healthy drive in the sense of the ability to act, not to destroy, and the right to self-actualization, which finding no outlet within was projected outward. You feared being too much, too ambitious, too demanding, too visible, because it might make you resemble those bad people you were warned about. And so you chose those who were called not enough, so that your own shadow would not seem so threatening, allowing you to continue avoiding encountering it. This fear of being like the demons we've discussed, be it the ever-needy, the recklessly free, or the weak-willed, leads us to make disadvantageous decisions, repeatedly choosing partners who serve only as mirrors for our internal conflicts, rather than sources of genuine intimacy and growth. Perhaps while reading this, you inwardly object, but I don't want to be helpless. I don't want to be irresponsible. I don't want to be aggressive. And in this objection lies a key mistake. We are not talking about becoming the embodiment of pathology, but about integrating healthy primal energy that was distorted and banished into the shadow. To acknowledge your vulnerability is not to become a victim, but to gain the strength to ask for and receive support. To embrace your spontaneity is not to descend into chaos, but to allow yourself the joy of life and creativity. To integrate your ambition is not to become a despot, but to realize your potential and assert your boundaries. The pain we experience in these relationships is not punishment, but a persistent invitation to return home, to those parts of ourselves that were rejected. It is a call to reunite with our own wholeness, to free ourselves from the shackles of fearing to be bad. For only by accepting all shades of our inner world can we build relationships based not on projections and avoidance, but on true acceptance and deep connection. And sometimes this acceptance begins not with the rejected demons, but with those aspects that seem ideal, almost divine. If the shadow we previously discussed appears to us in the guise of irritating, repulsive traits, then there also exists its radiant sister, clothed in the gold of admiration. This mysterious phenomenon is known in the depths of psychology as the golden shadow. She is no less insidious than her darker counterpart, for she can trap us in a cage of illusions where we endlessly seek externally what we long ago banished from our own inner world. The golden shadow is not merely a collection of virtues, but a culmination of our own unrealized talents, suppressed abilities, and rejected possibilities that we unknowingly project onto others. We see something so magnificent, so perfect in a partner that it seems unattainable, and thus we easily attribute these qualities to them rather than to ourselves. This could be their brilliant intellect, inexhaustible charisma, profound empathy, incredible courage, or boundless creativity. We look at them and think, if only I had that, unaware that these sparks of light could ignite within us had we not entrusted them to another soul. In romantic relationships, this projection becomes a subtle, almost imperceptible sabotage. We choose partners who, we believe, embody everything we desperately lack. We build relationships not with a living person, but with our idealized image, a phantom woven from our own unclaimed gifts. We admire them to the point of self-fascination. forgetfulness, placing them on a pedestal, but this act of adoration conceals a deep self-denial. We voluntarily relinquish our own power, the opportunity to embody these qualities ourselves, preferring to be merely passive observers of another's greatness. And when the idol inevitably falls from its pedestal, revealing their human nature, or when we, exhausted by perpetual adoration, realize our own emptiness, that's when disappointment sets in. It's not because the partner is flawed, but because we suddenly see how long we've lived in the shadow of another's light, forgetting our own. We resent that they didn't meet our expectations, when in reality, we didn't meet our own expectations. They didn't become the gods we appointed them, and we never became who we could have been. The price of this self-deception is a chronic feeling of inadequacy, a constant search for external validation, and the inability to build truly equal, deep relationships where each partner is a complete, shining star. Consider, who is your idol in romantic relationships? Who is that person whose qualities you praise, whom you are willing to forgive almost anything, just so they remain as radiant? What are your own talents and unrealized abilities that you've gifted to them? Perhaps it's their ease in making connections while you feel constrained in social situations, or their boundless patience when you long to show more compassion, or their courage in new ventures while you fear taking risks. Look at this image not as a portrait of another, but as a mirror reflecting your own dormant virtues. This one-sided transfer of energy, this unspoken agreement that you will be my embodiment of what I fear to be, creates an imbalance that inevitably destroys the strongest bonds. True relationships are built on the wholeness of two individuals, not on an attempt by one to fill the void of another. Genuine partnership is only possible when each of us takes responsibility for our own light. And so when we begin to see through the veil of admiration, when we start to feel not just envy for another's brilliance, but a vague premonition of our own potential, that's when the true journey begins. Until now, we've only peered into the shadowy corners of the soul where the shadow lurks and observed its whimsical games reflected in the mirror of romantic relationships. We've seen how the unseen threads of the past shape the present, causing us to repeatedly choose partners who seem wrong, but are in fact precise projections of our inner repressed worlds. However, knowledge, however profound, becomes fruitless without action. True alchemy begins where understanding transforms into practice and awareness into transformation. The time has come not just to contemplate, but to reclaim what was unconsciously given away. This is not merely an exercise, but a philosophy of life. Every strong reaction, be it burning irritation or overwhelming attraction to another person, is nothing less than an invitation to reclaim lost fragments of yourself. It is a call to gather together the scattered parts of your soul, dispersed through projections. It is in this act of reclamation that true power and the path to wholeness lie. We cease to be puppets of our unconscious programs and become conscious creators of our reality. I propose a simple yet powerful exercise requiring only honesty and a willingness to look inward. Let's call it the mirror of reflections. Recall a partner, current or former, or even just someone who evokes particularly strong emotions in you, both positive and negative. Now take a sheet of paper and a pen, or open a blank document. Divide the page into 2 columns. In the first, list 5 to 7 qualities of this person that provoke your most intense, sometimes irrational aversion, irritation, or even anger. For example, he's so irresponsible. She's too selfish. He constantly complains. She's so cold. Allow yourself to be utterly frank without censoring your thoughts. Next to it, in the second column, opposite each of these qualities, ask yourself, how does this quality manifest in me? In what context am I irresponsible? Where do I show selfishness? When do I complain? In what situations do I become cold? You might find that you suppress these qualities within yourself or express them in a different hidden form. For instance, you might despise irresponsibility in others because you're terrified of making mistakes yourself and always strive to be perfect, suppressing your own natural spontaneity and right to imperfection. Or you might disdain selfishness because you don't allow yourself to assert your own needs, considering it self-indulgent. After you've processed the negative projections, move on to the positive ones, those qualities that evoke your admiration, idealization, or an irresistible attraction. This could be someone's charisma, talent, confidence, inner freedom. Again, list 5 to 7 such qualities. And once more, ask yourself, where do these qualities reside within me? How can I manifest them in my own life? What talents and abilities do I suppress in myself, seeing them only in others? Perhaps you admire someone's courage because your own courage is locked in a cage of fear of judgment. Or you idealize someone's creativity because you've long forgotten your own creative impulses. The goal of this exercise is not self-flagellation, but the reclamation of your wholeness. Each time you uncover a repressed quality, you don't just become aware of it, you reclaim it. You recognize it as part of your spectrum of possibilities, your unique palette. This doesn't mean you must become irresponsible or selfish in a negative sense. It means you integrate the right to spontaneity, to healthy boundaries, to your own space. Conversely, by acknowledging the golden qualities within yourself, you stop projecting them onto another person's pedestal and begin to embody them in your own life. You reclaim your power from the hands of ideals and start living it yourself. When you learn to see in another person not just their personality, but also a mirror for your shadow, both negative and golden, you'll discover that the very nature of your relationships changes. They become less dependent on illusions and projections, more authentic and profound. This is the path to a partnership based not on flaws and idealizations, but on the wholeness of two conscious individuals. And this is just the beginning of the journey. For if the shadow shapes our choice of partner, it undoubtedly also determines how we build these relationships, how we express ourselves in conflicts, in intimacy, in daily interactions. There is yet another level of depth where the shadow reveals its secrets, influencing the dynamics of existing connections.